Welcome back to Criminally Human, where behind every headline is a person, a story, and a tragedy that didn't have to happen. But tonight, the story might not be over, because the man at the center of it all, Bryan Kohberger, may not just be locked away. He might be in danger because of what he knows. This isn't just about guilt or innocence. This is about what happens when someone becomes a liability to the system they once worked under. Tonight's story isn't just about a killer. It's about a man the world was told to fear, and what happens when the wrong person is cast as the villain. A case that seems tied up, until you start pulling at the loose threads. Bryan Kohberger told the jail he doesn't feel safe, and honestly, he shouldn't. Not because of the inmates, but because he might be the only one who knows the truth, and the only one left to stop it from dying with him. When Bryan Kohberger was arrested, the public expected closure. But as more details came out, one thing didn't sit right. Nothing actually connected him to the crime. No motive. No direct link. No history with the victims. No pattern of violence. Not even a social media trace. Just a strange mix of technology, timing, and theories. Pieces that only fit if you force them to. And yet, he was charged with one of the most horrifying crimes in recent memory. Kohberger wasn't a stranger to crime. He was studying it. A PhD student in criminology. He spent years researching how people commit crimes. But that's where things get strange. Because for someone accused of a crime this brutal, he didn't act like it. No history of violence. No past criminal record. No signs of obsession, compulsion, or breakdown. No trail of disturbing behavior. No meltdown. No look of guilt. No signs of hiding anything. Just silence. Almost like he didn't do it, but knew saying that wouldn't matter. He also wasn't studying alone. Kohberger worked under professors who had close ties to the FBI. One of his advisors had worked on high-profile federal cases. Kohberger also helped run academic research projects that gathered data from convicted criminals, asking how they chose their victims and got away with it. Some of those projects received federal grant money, and rumors have swirled online that certain criminology departments serve as recruiting grounds for CIA psychological research. Mind control, behavioral engineering, sleeper agents, it's all theories, but ones with government history behind them. What better place to test behavioral conditioning than a school full of willing participants? What better scapegoat than someone already trained to think like a killer? The knife sheath. The phone ping. The car on camera. Sounds solid, right? But the deeper you look, the more it feels like a setup. DNA found on a sheath. Left behind perfectly? Just one small trace. Not on the handle. Not on the blade. Just the snap. A white car that matches half the town? No plates, no driver seen, just a blurred shape. A phone that was off during the murders, but on just before and after? And somehow the data was enough to claim he was in the area. No blood trail. No weapon found. No eyewitnesses. No confession. No video placing him inside the house. What if this wasn't a trail he left, but a trail someone built? A digital frame-up by someone with access to federal systems, data logs, and forensic tools. Some people believe Bryan Kohberger wasn't the killer. He was the cover story. Think about it, a socially awkward guy studying serial killers. He fits the profile. But maybe that was the point. Pick someone who looks the part. Plant the right clues. Watch the public eat it up. Meanwhile, the actual killers walk free. And while the headlines screamed, "Monster," no one questioned the timing. No one asked why he left no digital signature of planning. No manifesto. No warning signs. He didn't act like someone fulfilling a dark fantasy. He acted like someone who was caught off guard and told to keep quiet. Let's look at what else was happening in Idaho. Hundreds of cops were losing their badges for abuse, lies, or worse. A growing pile of lawsuits. A system falling apart. And then, this case hits the news. Suddenly, All eyes are on Bryan Kohberger. A perfect distraction. While reporters chase court updates, nobody's watching the people in power. And if Bryan had worked around the FBI, shared psychological survey data with federal partners, or been part of classified level research, maybe he knew too much. Maybe he was never meant to leave that program. This wouldn't be the first time someone tied to government secrets was made to disappear, or discredited. Frank Olson, 1953, a CIA scientist involved in MKUltra. He began questioning the ethics of the program. Days later, he was allegedly drugged and thrown, or pushed, out of a hotel window in New York City. Official cause? Suicide. But decades later, the government admitted the CIA had drugged him with LSD without his knowledge. Aaron Alexis, 2013, a defense contractor and Navy veteran who carried out the Washington Navy Yard shooting. Before the attack, he claimed he was being targeted with mind control weapons and believed the government was manipulating him through low-frequency waves. He carved "my ELF weapon" into the stock of his gun, ELF meaning extremely low frequency. Myron May, 2014, a former prosecutor who believed he was a targeted individual under government surveillance. He mailed out packages explaining his fear of being watched and controlled, then opened fire in a Florida State University library before being killed by police. Philip Haney, 2020, a former Department of Homeland Security whistleblower who spoke out against what he called government suppression of information about terror threats. He was found dead from a gunshot wound, days before he was reportedly set to return to Washington to testify. Authorities called it suicide. Friends and family said no way. Jeffrey Allen Lash, 2015, found dead in his car surrounded by over 1,200 firearms, stacks of cash, and documents suggesting multiple identities. His fiancée claimed he was a hybrid government agent with alien DNA, working for multiple secret agencies. The media called him delusional. But how many average people die with that kind of arsenal? Each of them had ties to power. Each of them raised questions. And each of them was erased by suicide, scandal, or silence. And it doesn't stop there. Danny Casolaro, 1991, found dead in a hotel bathtub with 12 deep cuts on his wrists. He was investigating what he called the octopus, a vast network involving the CIA, NSA, banking systems, and global surveillance. His notes disappeared. Official ruling? Suicide. Dr. David Kelly, 2003, a British weapons expert who challenged the UK government's claims about Iraq's WMDs, found dead in the woods with a slit wrist, shortly after being outed as a whistleblower. Friends and doctors challenged the suicide claim. Michael Hastings, 2013, investigative journalist who exposed top military corruption, including General Stanley McChrystal, died in a fiery single-car crash just after emailing colleagues that he was onto something big and going off the radar. Some experts believe his car may have been remotely hacked. Mark Lombardi, 2000, an artist who made complex diagrams linking politicians, banks, and intelligence agencies, found hanged in his studio. One of his final works, allegedly connecting the Bush family to Saudi financiers, went missing. Bill Cooper, 2001, a former U.S. naval intelligence officer who warned about government overreach and predicted a major event would be used to push war. Months after September 11th, he was shot and killed by police outside his home. Gary Webb, 2004, journalist who exposed the CIA's role in funneling cocaine into U.S. cities, faced backlash and career destruction. Later found dead with 2 gunshot wounds to the head, still ruled a suicide. All of them had one thing in common: they questioned the system, and became stories themselves. The easiest way to silence someone? Paint them as dangerous. The moment the public believes it, their voice no longer matters. When I look at the Idaho murders, it's very strange. The court sealed documents. Gag orders were everywhere. And before the public could learn much, they destroyed the crime scene. That's right. They tore the house down. Who erases a murder scene that fast? Unless what was in there could prove someone else was involved. The body cam footage, the 911 call, the full police interviews, all hidden, redacted, sealed. Why would they do this if they truly wanted answers? We never got to hear Kohberger speak freely. His lawyers spoke for him. His plea deal avoided trial. The state got their conviction, and the questions disappeared. Yes, he took a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. But what he never did was confess. Not once has he said why. Not once has he said how. In fact, he's never even admitted to doing it in his own words. And for someone labeled a mass murderer, that's almost unheard of. Because even the darkest killers usually talk. They write letters. They grant interviews. They want the world to understand their darkness, to feel their power through confession. Talking gives them control. But Kohberger, he's been completely silent. No motive. No breakdown. No bragging. No explanation. Just a wall of stillness that feels unnatural. And deep down, something doesn't sit right. He doesn't match the pattern. He doesn't act like the monster they described. Because maybe, he never wrote this script at all. Sometimes, people don't need evidence. They need someone to blame. And Bryan Kohberger, with his quiet face, his background in crime, and no one to protect him, was easy to point at. But what if the real killer is still out there? What if this case was never about justice? Just a show? What if Bryan Kohberger was used, watched, and then discarded, by the very people who once trained him? What if his silence isn't guilt, but survival? It's almost too clean, isn't it? Every time the case starts to wobble, another piece of evidence appears, just enough to keep the story alive, but never enough to prove anything. It's like the script keeps getting rewritten behind the scenes. And while we're fed courtroom sketches and censored documents, there's one person who isn't speaking. If he's guilty, why the silence? And if he's innocent, why the fear? And then there's the timing, the way the entire world seemed ready for a villain when his face appeared on the screen. The perfect suspect, at the perfect moment, to calm a panicked public. But history has shown us, when power needs control, it doesn't chase truth, it manufactures it. Maybe Bryan Kohberger isn't the evil we were told to see. Maybe he's the proof that the story was never about murder, but about manipulation. The deeper you look, the stranger it gets. Because the same agencies that shape our perception of danger, the CIA, the FBI, the behavioral labs they fund, were the ones feeding his academic world. These are the same people who've run real psychological operations for decades. Mind control studies under MKUltra, experiments in obedience, even research into how fear spreads through the public like a virus. And now we're supposed to believe a student trained under that system suddenly snapped. Or is it more likely that he was studying patterns someone didn't want uncovered, and when he got too close, they turned him into the pattern itself? The justice system told us it's over. The media told us we got our man. But Bryan Kohberger never told us anything. No confession. No closure. Just silence. And maybe, that silence is the loudest warning of all. Because when the government trains you to think like a killer, and then paints you as one, what choice do you have but to shut your mouth and hope they don't bury you? What if this wasn't about solving a case, but erasing the one man who could solve it too well? The evidence doesn't add up. The motive never existed. And the only person who ever looked guilty might have just been the most dangerous kind of witness. An insider who lived long enough to know too much. And if he really was set up, ask yourself this. Who's behind the mask we were told to fear? Because if it wasn't Bryan Kohberger, then the real killer is still out there. To the ones screaming, he's guilty, let it go. Ask yourself why you're so comfortable with answers that don't make sense. This isn't about defending Bryan Kohberger. It's about defending the truth. Because if they can charge someone with no confession, no motive, no history, no eyewitnesses, and you still clap, what happens when it's someone who doesn't fit the narrative so cleanly? When we stop asking questions just because the headlines told us it's over, we stop using our brains, and start being spectators in a system that's been known to write its own endings. I'm not the type to just nod and accept what they hand me. If the story doesn't add up, I ask questions. If the timeline's too clean, I dig deeper. I don't care how loud the headlines scream, guilty. Until the truth makes sense, I'm not letting it go. If Brian Coberger is guilty, the facts should scream it. But they don't. They whisper. They glitch. They vanish. They come wrapped in redacted files, sealed interviews, destroyed evidence, and a man who won't, or can't, speak. That's not justice. That's a script. And scripts are written by people with something to hide. So before you close this tab and say, "Case closed," ask yourself, what if the real monster is the machine that made you stop asking? This has been another episode of Criminally Human. Please like, share and subscribe.